Nurse saves Marine with PTSD at train station. 24 hours later, she's fired and invited by the president. The Marine dropped without warning. It was just past rush hour at Union Station. Sergeant Daniel Brooks stood motionless in uniform, surrounded by noise, strangers, and fluorescent light. Then, a passerby brushed him hard. His body flinched, seized, and collapsed. People screamed. Phones came out. Dozens stepped back. Only one person stepped forward. Hannah Reid, a nurse fresh off a 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, pushed through the crowd. She knelt beside him without hesitation. "You're okay," she said. "I'm here. I'm a nurse." He was twitching, breathing in short, ragged bursts. Classic signs of a PTSD episode: overstimulated, disoriented, spiraling. The phones kept filming. She checked his pulse. Stable, but fast. Shielding his head with one hand, she leaned in closer. "You're not there. You're here. You're safe." No one else moved. No one else spoke. For 2 long minutes, Hannah kept him grounded, her tone steady against the chaos. She placed her hand gently on his chest. "Feel this? You're alive. You're home." Paramedics arrived, pushing through the onlookers. The lead EMT knelt. "What happened?" Hannah didn't blink. "He has PTSD, likely triggered by the crowd and sudden contact. He needs sedation, not restraint." The paramedic nodded slowly. "Got it." As they lifted Sergeant Brooks onto a stretcher, his eyes opened briefly. He found Hannah's face, barely able to focus, lips parted as if to speak. But sedation was already doing its work. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice whispered she saved him. That night, Hannah sat alone in the hospital lobby, scrolling through her phone. Her scrub pants still had dust from the station floor. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline that hadn't quite settled. The video was viral. Nurse saves Marine after PTSD collapse at Union Station. #HeroNurse. #Veteran Crisis. #Compassion in Action. Hundreds of thousands of views. Comments pouring in. "She didn't run, she stayed. This is the kind of nurse you pray for. Give her a medal already." Hannah turned off her phone. She hadn't done it for cameras. She hadn't even noticed them. But the world had noticed her. And in a quiet Washington office, a staffer reviewed the clip for the 4th time and reached for the phone. Because this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a story the president needed to hear. Flashing lights painted the platform red and white. Paramedics rushed in, cutting through the stunned crowd. Hannah Reid was still on her knees beside Sergeant Daniel Brooks, her hand wrapped around his wrist, fingers on his pulse. She didn't look up. "He has a combat history. PTSD," she said, voice clipped, clinical. "Triggered by sudden contact. He needs sedation, not restraint." The lead paramedic studied her, scrubs dusty, calm under pressure, her tone unmistakably professional. He gave a sharp nod. "Copy that." One EMT administered a sedative. Another began vitals. A third prepared the stretcher. All the while, Hannah kept her eyes on Daniel. His tremors had slowed. His jaw was no longer clenched. His breaths, though shallow, were steady. A bystander whispered she saved his life. The crowd around them had grown. Reporters were already on scene. Someone shoved a mic toward Hannah, but she ignored it. Her focus was Daniel, still fighting a battle invisible to most. When they finally lifted him onto the stretcher, his gaze drifted back to her. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're not alone." He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. Moments later, he was gone, rushed to the nearest VA hospital. The chaos followed him up the stairs. The platform fell quiet. Hannah stood slowly. Her knees ached. Her shift had ended hours ago. But something told her this wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point. By the time she left Union Station, the video had already crossed 1 million views. That night, in the hospital lobby, she waited alone. Still shaken. Still steady. A nurse to the core. She unlocked her phone. News alerts flashed across the screen. Viral hero nurse identified after saving PTSD-stricken Marine. Union Station collapse sparks national conversation on veteran care. #NurseHero. #PTSD awareness. #Union Station incident. #Hannah Reid. #viral nurse. Thousands of messages flooded her inbox. From fellow nurses. From veterans. From strangers who said her bravery reminded them of humanity. But Hannah didn't post. She didn't tweet. She just sat quietly, holding her phone, wondering how a simple act of care had turned into something so public. Outside the glass doors of the hospital, reporters waited. Inside, Hannah just wanted to be sure Daniel Brooks was still breathing, still healing. This was more than viral. This was real. By morning, Hannah Reid was a national name. The video of her saving a Marine in full PTSD collapse at Union Station had spread across social media like wildfire. News anchors dissected every second of the clip. Veterans groups were reposting it with messages of gratitude. The comments poured in by the thousands. She didn't hesitate. That's real courage. Someone give this woman a medal. But inside St. Catherine's Hospital, the mood was different. When Hannah walked through the main entrance, still tired from the night before, the usual greetings didn't come. Nurses averted their eyes. Admin staff glanced up, then quickly backed down. Even the security guard at the front desk offered only a stiff nod. Something was wrong. She hadn't even reached her locker when her supervisor appeared in the hallway. "Ms. Reid, can I speak with you in my office?" No warmth. No, good morning. Just protocol. Inside the office, the blinds were drawn. The air felt sterile. Her supervisor, a woman who had praised her patient care just last week, now sat stiffly behind her desk, a printed document in hand. Hannah didn't sit. "I want to begin by saying we're aware of the incident at Union Station," the supervisor said, her voice carefully neutral. "And, of the video?" Hannah nodded slowly. "Yes. I rendered emergency aid. The man was experiencing a PTSD episode. You acted on your own," the supervisor replied, eyes narrowing. "Outside of a designated emergency setting, without hospital oversight, while wearing hospital-issued scrubs with our name clearly visible." Hannah blinked. He collapsed. No one was helping him. "We are not questioning your intentions," the supervisor said quickly, almost rehearsed. "But your actions created legal exposure, public association with our hospital, liability without clearance. You were off-duty. You were not authorized." Then she pushed the paper across the desk. "Termination notice. We're letting you go. Effective immediately." For a moment, everything went quiet. Hannah stared at the letter. Her hands didn't move. Her mouth didn't open. She simply stood, stunned. "I saved his life," she said finally. "We understand that," her supervisor replied, not meeting her eyes. "But our legal team is more afraid of lawsuits than grateful for service." Neither of them said anything after that. Hannah picked up the letter, folded it slowly, and left the room without another word. The doors of St. Catherine slid open. The sunlight outside was harsh. The crowd waiting was larger than the day before. Cameras, boom mics, reporters. One spotted her first. "There she is." Suddenly they all closed in. "Ms. Reid, did the hospital really fire you after the Union Station incident? Do you feel punished for doing the right thing? Are you the nurse who saved the Marine?" She didn't respond. The only sound was the repeated click-click-click of camera shutters. She kept walking. By the time she reached her car, her phone was already blowing up. Calls, texts, emails. Her sister, her old college roommate, two nurses she hadn't spoken to in years, a veteran who had been at Union Station that night. People were reaching out from every direction, furious, stunned, moved. And then the first headline broke. "Nurse fired after saving U.S. Marine from PTSD collapse. Hospital cites liability concerns." Within hours, it was trending. Hashtag Justice for Hannah. Hashtag Nurse fired for saving life. Hashtag Union Station hero. That evening, Hannah sat on her apartment floor surrounded by unopened mail and half-empty tea mugs. She stared at the blank screen of her TV, her phone buzzing beside her. The job was gone. Her name was everywhere. She'd gone from anonymous nurse to viral hero to unemployed, all in less than 24 hours. But still, she didn't regret it. She remembered the Marine's face, the tremble in his hands, the way he'd looked at her as the sedative pulled him away from fear. That wasn't a decision. That was instinct. That was care. And that was nursing. She finally opened her laptop. The inbox was overflowing. Hundreds of emails from total strangers. "My brother has PTSD. Thank you. You did what no one else had the courage to do. I'm a nurse too. You're not alone." Meanwhile, across town, on a muted hospital TV mounted in a waiting room corner, a news anchor addressed the camera. In a shocking development, Nurse Hannah Reid has reportedly been terminated from St. Catherine's Hospital after a video of her saving a Marine during a PTSD episode at Union Station went viral. The hospital cites legal risks for off-duty intervention, but the public reaction has been fierce. A panelist chimed in. "We talk about mental health and veteran care like it's a priority, But when someone actually steps up, they're punished for it? In another city, Sergeant Daniel Brooks lay in a recovery room at the VA hospital. His hands were steadier now. His color had returned. When a journalist asked if he remembered what happened, he said yes. "I remember falling," he said quietly. "And I remember a voice telling me I was safe." He paused, blinking back tears. She didn't walk away. News of Hannah Reid's firing sparked a firestorm. Within hours, social media exploded. The hashtags #HeroNurse and #JusticeForHannah trended nationwide. Thousands shared the viral video of her saving Sergeant Daniel Brooks from a violent PTSD episode at Union Station and condemned the hospital's decision to terminate her. Veterans organizations, mental health advocates, and everyday people took up her cause. Messages flooded in from military families who had seen firsthand the challenges of PTSD. They called Hannah a lifeline in a system that often fails those who served. One veterans group posted, "Nurses like Hannah are the real heroes. We demand her reinstatement and proper support for those living with PTSD." TV anchors debated the ethics of the hospital's decision. Some called it a bureaucratic failure to recognize true heroism. Others said it revealed the urgent need for better mental health protocols and protections for caregivers stepping up in crisis. But beyond the talk shows and news clips, the story had a deeper ripple. Daniel Brooks was recovering at a military hospital, the same hospital where veterans who had faced trauma found refuge. And Daniel, now more grounded and calm, was asked a question he hadn't been prepared for. "Do you remember the nurse who saved you?" He nodded, eyes welling with tears. "She didn't run. She stayed. She brought me back." His words hit hard, not just for the millions who saw the story unfold, but for those who understood what it meant to be trapped by invisible wounds. Meanwhile, Hannah watched the growing national support from her modest apartment. Letters arrived daily. Handwritten notes, bouquets, packages filled with thanks and encouragement. Strangers from across the country sent gifts, coffee, books on PTSD, and letters from fellow nurses who had faced similar battles. She read every message but didn't respond. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and she wasn't sure what to say. Her phone rang late one evening. The caller ID showed unknown. She answered cautiously. "Miss Reid, this is a representative from the White House," said a calm, measured voice. "The president is aware of your actions and the subsequent response. He would like to meet with you." Hannah's heart raced. A meeting with the president? It felt surreal. Days later, she found herself walking through the grand halls of the White House, still in her plain clothes, but carrying the weight of a story that had captured the nation. At a private ceremony, Sergeant Daniel Brooks stood beside her, both dressed formally. The president spoke directly to the gathered few. "When duty called outside her shift," she answered, "Hannah Reid showed us what it means to serve, not just in uniform, but in heart and action." Hannah listened quietly as cameras flashed, but this moment wasn't about fame. It was about recognition for care, courage, and humanity. Back home, Veterans Foundations began working to establish programs inspired by Hannah's story. Clinics for mental health, especially focused on PTSD, received new funding. The public's eyes had been opened by one nurse's refusal to walk away. On social media, people still posted the mural painted at Union Station, an image of Hannah kneeling beside Daniel, titled "Compassion in Action." It was a daily reminder that one act could change many lives. Hannah knew her journey was far from over. But with every letter, every hashtag, every step forward, she understood this. Sometimes, doing the right thing comes with a cost. But the ripple it creates can reach farther than you ever imagine. Hannah Reid sat quietly in her small apartment, surrounded by letters and flowers from strangers who had never met her but saw her as a hero. The weight of the past days, firing, national outcry, a viral story, settled around her like a heavy fog. Her phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Miss Reid? This is Clara from the White House," the voice said softly. "The president has been following your story closely. He would like to invite you to Washington, D.C. for a private meeting." Hannah paused. The words felt unreal. She swallowed hard, nodded to herself. "Yes, I'll come." Days later, Hannah found herself walking through the marble halls of the White House, the grandeur overwhelming but the purpose clear. The nation's highest office wanted to honor her, not just for saving Sergeant Daniel Brooks, but for shining a spotlight on the challenges veterans with PTSD face every day. At the ceremony, Sergeant Brooks stood beside her, now calm and steady in a sharp suit, no longer the pale, distant young man she'd found on that cold platform. The president addressed the room, his voice steady. When duty called outside her shift, Reid answered without hesitation. Her courage reminds us all that heroism is not confined to battlefields or hospitals. It lives in the acts of kindness we show each other every day. Cameras flashed as the president handed Hannah a civilian medal for bravery. Sergeant Brooks hugged her tightly, tears in his eyes. "I owe her my life," he said simply. The story made headlines across the country. From fired nurse to White House medal recipient. Hannah Reid, a hero recognized at last. Marine and nurse reunite at presidential ceremony. But for Hannah, the recognition was bittersweet. She had lost her job. She had faced harsh judgment from her employer. But this moment was proof that doing the right thing mattered. After the ceremony, Hannah met with veterans advocates and mental health professionals who had been inspired by her story. They discussed how to build better support systems for veterans suffering from PTSD, how to train more nurses and first responders to recognize and respond to these silent crises. Hannah promised to keep fighting. Not just for herself or Daniel, but for every veteran and nurse caught in similar struggles. Weeks later, Hannah began working at a new clinic focused on veterans' mental health, started by a foundation inspired by her story. Sergeant Brooks volunteered on weekends, both committed to turning pain into healing. At Union Station, a mural now brightened the wall where Daniel had collapsed, a painting of Hannah kneeling beside him, titled "Compassion in Action." It was a public reminder of one woman's courage and the difference it made. Hannah walked through the clinic one morning, greeted by a new nurse who echoed the words Hannah had spoken months before at Union Station. "Whatever happens, I'm here. You're not alone." And Hannah smiled, knowing that sometimes the smallest act of care can create the biggest change. The cameras flashed relentlessly. Hannah Reid stood tall, a civilian medal gleaming on her chest. The room buzzed with applause as the president stepped forward, his voice steady and sincere. When duty called outside her shift, Hannah answered, he said. Her act of bravery saved a life and reminded us all of the power of compassion. Hannah's eyes scanned the crowd, landing on Sergeant Daniel Brooks. He stood beside the president, proud and steady, the same young man she had found collapsed on the Union Station platform weeks before. His eyes met hers, full of gratitude. The president extended his hand. Hannah accepted the handshake, firm and respectful. Then Sergeant Brooks pulled her into a warm embrace. "I owe you more than my life," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me what it means to come home." The moment was a culmination of everything that had happened. The viral video, the hospital firing, the national outcry, the presidential invitation. But standing there, receiving one of the country's highest civilian honors, Hannah knew this was about more than just recognition. It was a statement that care matters, that courage exists outside combat zones, that one nurse's choice can change lives forever. Reporters swarmed outside the ceremony. Microphones were thrust toward Hannah, hungry for her words. "I did what any nurse would do," she said simply. It wasn't about cameras or medals. It was about care, about being human. Every patient, every person deserves that. Her words echoed across news outlets and social media platforms, amplifying the message of empathy and courage. Sergeant Brooks added, "Her act of kindness saved more than my life. It reminded me of home." As the press conference ended, Hannah was led to a quiet room where veterans, nurses, and mental health advocates waited. They discussed the future. Programs to train nurses in mental health crises, funding for PTSD support services, and public awareness campaigns inspired by Hannah's story. One advocate said, "Hannah's bravery has given veterans a voice and nurses the strength to act." "This is just the beginning," Hannah nodded. The journey was far from over. But now, it was one she didn't walk alone. Weeks later, Hannah began working at a new clinic established by a foundation dedicated to veterans' mental health, an initiative sparked by her actions and the national attention they drew. Sergeant Brooks volunteered there on weekends, his recovery ongoing but steady. The clinic was a sanctuary, a place where veterans found understanding and care tailored to their unique needs. Hannah walked its halls every morning, greeted by colleagues inspired by her story. New nurses echoed her words, the same promise she had made that chilly night at Union Station. "Whatever happens, I'm here. You're not alone." Outside, at Union Station, a mural now brightened the wall where Daniel had collapsed, a vivid painting of Hannah kneeling beside him, titled "Compassion in Action." Passers-by stopped to look, some taking pictures, others simply pausing to remember. It was a daily reminder of the power of human kindness in the face of crisis. Back in her apartment, Hannah often reflected on the journey from exhaustion on a crowded platform to the spotlight of the White House. The path had been rocky, filled with unexpected challenges and hard truths about bureaucracy and fear. But it had also revealed something vital, that one act of courage can ripple outward, touching countless lives. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of thanks and support. Strangers shared their stories of struggle and healing. Nurses reached out, asking for advice. Veterans sent letters of encouragement. Through it all, Hannah stayed grounded. She was still a nurse. Still someone who answered when duty called. Not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Weeks had passed since the ceremony, and life for Hannah Reid had shifted in ways she never imagined. The national spotlight had dimmed, but the impact of her actions continued to grow quietly, steadily, meaningfully. Hannah now worked at a new clinic dedicated to veterans' mental health, an initiative born from the foundation inspired by her story. The clinic was a beacon of hope for those wrestling with PTSD and other invisible wounds, offering tailored care from nurses and counselors trained to understand the unique challenges veterans face. Sergeant Daniel Brooks volunteered on weekends, his recovery ongoing but evident in his steady presence. He was no longer the pale, distant young man on the platform that cold night. Now, he was a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to what care and kindness could achieve. Walking through the clinic one morning, Hannah was greeted by a new nurse, bright-eyed and eager. "Whatever happens," the young nurse said, echoing the words Hannah had once spoken on that platform. "I'm here. You're not alone." Hannah smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. The torch had passed. Outside Union Station, the mural titled "Compassion in Action" stood proud on the very wall where Daniel had collapsed. The painting captured Hannah kneeling beside him, her hands steady, her face calm and determined. It was more than art, it was a symbol of kindness rewarded. A reminder that the smallest acts of courage and care could create ripples that change lives forever. Hannah's story had become more than a headline or a viral video. It had become a movement. Veterans organizations cited her as a beacon for new mental health programs. Nurses across the country shared her story, inspired to act with the same bravery and compassion. Mental health professionals pushed for better PTSD care protocols, armed with a story that resonated deeply with the public. In the quiet moments, Hannah reflected on everything she'd faced. The exhaustion, the firing, the national spotlight. But above all, the people, the veterans and nurses who reached out, the community that rallied, the lives touched. Her reward for kindness wasn't a medal or a headline. It was the knowledge that she had made a difference, that she had answered a call not just on that platform, but every day since. Her journey was proof that true heroism doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it comes with quiet courage and a promise. "I'm here. You're not alone." And for Hannah Reid, that promise was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written not just in headlines, but in lives healed and hope restored.